The pack has always come first, Luna. You've always known that. David's tone carried the practiced smoothness of a born alpha. But underneath the honeyed calm sat something final and cold. Luna didn't move. The ceremonial silk draped over her shoulders, once a promise, now felt like a burial cloth. Her gaze slid from him to the woman standing just behind his shoulder. Aelina, heir of the Northern Ridge bloodline. For the pack, Luna echoed, and the phrase turned bitter on her tongue. Or for the alliance your father brokered. Not here, David muttered, eyes flicking toward the packed courtyard. Take the severance with some dignity. I won't take anything from you. Her voice dropped low, quiet enough to be dangerous. You've made your choice of queen. Now stand back and watch what I make of myself. The great hall reeked of pine sap, nervous perspiration, and the heavy floral scent worn by the Northern Ridge envoys. Luna lingered near the archway, an island in a sea of celebration. This night was supposed to belong to her. 3 years she'd spent at David's side, untangling pack politics, forging trade routes, winning over stubborn elders one by one. She had earned this. Instead, the moon's blessing tonight felt like a punchline aimed squarely at her dot across the hall. David held the room the way he always did, tall, broad, dark-haired, eyes like a churning grey sea, eyes that used to find her in any crowd. Tonight, they refused to look her way at all. Beside him, Aelina glowed with a soft, breakable beauty, pale, delicate, everything Luna's lean, weathered strength was not. Luna watched him bend to murmur something in Eleanor's ear, watched the girl's laugh ring out like a bell, and felt something feral coil low in her chest. She swallowed it whole. She would not hand them the show of her falling apart. The boy's a fool. She didn't need to turn. She knew that gravel-worn voice. Silas, keeper of the pack's history, one of the rare few who'd always stood behind her without condition, a fool with a very well-connected father-in-law now, Luna answered, not shifting her eyes from the couple. Power built on betrayal and a house with no foundation, Silas said, leaning his weight into his cane. You're the one who kept this pack fed through the worst winter in a decade. Aelina brings soldiers. Fine. Soldiers still need bread. David's betting the Northern Ridge Alliance secures our borders for good, Luna said, reciting it flatly, refusing to let the ache leak into her words. It's a coward's gamble dressed up as strategy, Silas grumbled. He's more afraid of your strength than he ever admitted needing it. That girl will nod along to whatever he says. You never would. Luna shut her eyes for one breath. It stung precisely because it was true. David had always flinched from her ambition, from the speed of her mind, from her refusal to simply bow. He'd wanted a partner in name and a subject in practice. Then the music changed, the festive rhythm dissolving into something slow and ceremonial. The mating dance. The crowd folded back to open a circle at the center of the floor. David led Aelina into it, and together they became a living portrait of unity, of dynastic power. Something cold closed around Luna's stomach. This was the moment the pack would witness it made real. She couldn't stand and watch. She slipped through the archway and down the stone corridor toward the archive wing, where the air smelled of dust and old parchment instead of celebration. She needed silence to think, to plan her next step. By pack law, the severance made her nothing now. No rank, no claim, no place. Her small office waited at the back of the archives, buried under maps, ledgers, letters, physical proof of everything she'd built. She lifted her worn leather journal and thumbed through it. Ideas, blueprints, plans to grow the pack's reach far past its current borders. David had waved most of them off as reckless. A noise at the door made her flinch. David stepped inside and shut it behind him. The room went taut with tension instantly. You walked out of your own ceremony, he said carefully. I didn't think you needed me there to celebrate, she replied, keeping her voice level. Luna, he dragged a hand through his hair. I never wanted it to happen this way. Then you shouldn't have let it happen at all. It's not that simple, he sighed, propping himself against the doorframe. The Northern Ridge, I already know about the alliance, David. I read the reports before they crossed your desk. There were other paths. We could have built a treaty without. She gestured vaguely toward the hall behind him. Marcus demanded a bonded union. It was the only price he'd accept. So you traded me for it. I made a call for the good of the pack, he snapped, his tone sharpening. You, of all people, understand sacrifice, she laughed, a hard, joyless sound. I understand it perfectly. I gave 3 years of my life to this pack's survival, and this is my reward. You'll be taken care of, he said. Quieter now. A home near the border. An allowance. A cage, she cut in. You want me tucked away somewhere quiet, so I stop reminding you what a coward looks like. His eyes flared. Watch yourself. I'm still your alpha. No, she said softly, and the word landed like a stone dropped into still water, heavy and somehow freeing. You're not. I reject the severance terms, he stared, blindsided. You can't do that. You have no standing left. Then I'll leave the Silver Crescent altogether, she said. Steel in her voice now. I'll take what's mine and walk. And go where? He scoffed. Lone wolves don't last. She held his gaze, unreadable. I'm not a lone wolf, David. I'm a survivor. And I'm finished surviving in your shadow. She snatched the journal, stuffed it into her satchel, and walked past him without a backward glance. The scent of pine and betrayal followed her out long after the door swung shut. The border of Silver Crescent territory was marked by an old oak, split down one side by some ancient lightning strike. Luna stood before it as rain began to fall, cold, thin, relentless, soaking through her hair and collar. She didn't look back. No farewell procession. No crowd to mourn her leaving. She'd slipped out along the service trails. She herself had once mapped Doc crossing the boundary, took more out of her than she expected. The instant her boot passed the invisible line, something inside her chest tore loose, not in the air, but deep in her body. The pack bond, that golden, invisible thread linking her to David, to Silas, to the land itself. It snapped clean. She dropped to her knees in the wet gravel, gasping, arms wrapped around her middle, as though a bone had been pulled straight out of her. The familiar hum of the pack mind, background noise she'd lived inside her whole life, went utterly, terrifyingly silent. Rogue. The words sat on her tongue like copper. She stayed there in the mud for 10 long minutes, letting the cold numb the phantom wound. Then logic sliced through the pain. Staying still made her vulnerable. She forced herself up, brushed the gravel from her knees, and started walking toward the highway. She didn't shift to run. A lone wolf near human roads would draw eyes she couldn't afford. Instead, she walked 3 miles to a battered bus shelter and waited on the damp bench until headlights finally cut through the dark. The bus was nearly empty. She paid with crumpled bills she'd stashed away for exactly this kind of emergency, and took a seat near the back. As the forest gave way to the sprawl of Oak Haven's skyline, she pulled out her journal, pages of charts, contacts, and logistics plans David had always dismissed as unnecessary. He believed power lived in fangs and bloodlines. Luna knew better. Real power lived in supply chains, information, capital. By sunrise, the bus dropped her in the financial heart of the city. Glass towers, ceaseless motion, the smell of exhaust and fresh coffee tangled with wet concrete. A scent so chaotic no tracker could follow it. She walked into the morning rush with a single destination in mind: the brass doors of Oak Haven Central Depository. 3 years earlier, anticipating exactly this kind of collapse, she'd quietly rented a safety deposit box under a false name. Inside the private viewing room, she opened the box. A modest stash of cash, forged but flawless identification under the name Luna Vance, and a plain burner phone. Not a fortune, but a foundation. Her first call wasn't for a place to sleep. It was for a meeting. Julian, she said the moment the line connected. Her voice didn't betray a hint of what her body had just survived. I was starting to think the Silver Crescent's brightest mind would never dial this number, came the smooth, faintly amused reply. What do I owe the honor? Julian Thorne was a human financier who worked the blurred edge between human markets and werewolf territory, brokering deals for packs who wanted modern tools but wouldn't deal directly with humans. Luna had negotiated with him twice before, always through a proxy. "I've left the Silver Crescent," she said, laying the terms out plainly. "I'm in Oakhaven now. Give me half an hour, and I'll hand you the ground floor of a logistics network that makes the Northern Ridge trade routes irrelevant." A long pause followed. Julian priced risk for a living, and he understood exactly what it meant for a pack to lose its chief strategist. "The Vanguard Club," he finally said, his amusement sliding into something sharper. "Noon. Dress properly. They don't allow denim. I'll be there." She ended the call and caught her own reflection in the steel of the deposit box. Exhausted, damp, shadows carved under her eyes. But behind all of it burned something cold and unbreakable. David had chosen a pretty ornament to sit beside his throne. Luna intended to build an empire that would one day swallow his borders whole. She gathered her cash and her new name and stepped back into the city to buy herself a suit. 6 months passed with the merciless speed of a blade dropping. On the 42nd floor of a glass tower in Oakhaven's business district, Luna stood at the window, watching the skyline dissolve into evening light. Tailored charcoal blazer, spine straight, expression locked down tight. The door chimed. "Come in," she said. Without turning, Julian entered carrying a slim tablet and folded himself into the leather chair across from her desk. "Ethelgard's quarterly numbers are in," he said, smirking faintly. "We've pulled 60% of raw silver transports away from the traditional pack carriers, private contractors, human shell companies. We're moving product twice as fast at 80% of the old cost." She turned from the glass, resting against the desk's edge. "And Northern Ridge." He glanced at the tablet, feeling the pinch. "Alpha Marcus is jacking up his tariffs to cover the lost transit income. It's not winning him friends among the smaller allied packs." "Predictable," she murmured, arms folding. It had been a brutal half-year. She'd barely slept, pouring every ounce of grief and fury and isolation into building Ethelgard from nothing. With Julian's early backing and her exhaustive knowledge of werewolf economics, she'd found every crack in the old system and widened it. Wolves ran on tradition, handshake deals, honor code centuries old. Luna brought contracts, tracking, cold efficiency. She hadn't rebuilt a pack. She'd engineered a machine. "There's something else," Julian said, his tone shifting. He pushed a file to the wall monitor. "We intercepted financial records out of Silver Crescent, mostly ledgers." Something flickered across Luna's face, quick and involuntary. "I asked you to keep them out of our operations." "I know. This came through a secondary vendor. You need to see it," he said gently. She stepped toward the screen. The ledgers told a story of collapse. The trade balances she'd carefully engineered were falling apart. Elena, now Luna in name, was supposed to be managing the internal economy. Instead, the records showed reckless spending on territorial expansion with nothing to show for it, and lavish ceremonial upgrades no one needed. Worse, the winter grain stores, normally purchased months earlier, hadn't been touched. "They're out of capital," she said, voice flat, clinical. David counted on Marcus to fill the gap. "But Marcus is holding his money close." Julian pointed at another line. "It's worse than that. Look at the debt structure. He's not just withholding funds. He's lending to Silver Crescent at predatory rates, using their borderland as collateral." Luna's eyes narrowed as the math clicked into place. "It's a hostile takeover," she said quietly. "Marcus didn't marry his daughter off for an alliance. He married her off to bleed David dry and swallow the territory the second they default." Silence settled over the office. For all his physical presence, David was a novice next to the calculating old alpha of Northern Ridge. He'd traded a partner who watched his back for a pawn, who'd quietly opened the gate. "Do we step in?" Julian asked, watching her closely for any crack. Luna studied the numbers, the slow ruin of the man who'd cast her aside. She remembered the finality in his eyes that night, the cottage he'd offered like a kindness, the bomb tearing loose in the rain. "No," she said, killing the screen with a click. "Let them run dry. When they're fully broken, when Marcus moves to seize the land, Ethelgard buys the debt out from under him." Julian arched a brow. clearly impressed by the sheer precision of her cruelty. "You want to own your ex." "I want to own the land," she corrected, moving back to her desk. "David's just a tenant who's behind on rent, though we may need to move faster than planned. My assistant says we have an unannounced visitor downstairs." "Who?" "Silas," she said. And for just a moment, real warmth broke through the professional mask. "The Silver Crescent historian. Seems the elders have finally noticed their king is marching them off a cliff. And they sent the one man who could actually find me." The glass doors of Luna's office slid open, and the sterile, climate-controlled air of Ethelgard was suddenly cut through with the scent of wet earth, old pine, and winter frost. Silas stood in the doorway, smaller than she remembered, his coat frayed at the cuffs, his silver hair thinning. He leaned on his carved cane, pale eyes tracing the sleek steel and leather around him. When his gaze finally reached her, a tired, knowing smile broke across his weathered face. "You've built yourself quite a tower, Luna," he rasped, his voice bouncing faintly off the open space. A long climb for an old dwarf. Something tightened in her throat, the ghost of a bond she'd worked hard to forget. She came around the desk, heels clicking on polished concrete, and pulled out a chair for him. "Sit, Silas, please." Her voice had gone softer than it had been in 6 months. She caught Julian's eye. He nodded once and slipped out, leaving them alone. She poured 2 cups of smoky lapsang tea from the side console, the same scent as the autumn bonfires they used to sit around, and set one before him. His hands trembled slightly as he lifted it to breathe in the steam. "You already know why I've come." "I know the pack's bankrupt," Luna said, returning to stand behind her desk, keeping the distance deliberate. "I know Marcus is squeezing David for every inch of borderland. I know the winter stores were never bought." Silas closed his eyes. "It's worse than the numbers show, child. The elders are giving up their own rations so the pups can eat. The hunting grounds are stripped bare. David," he paused. "David's cornered. He paces the hall like a trapped animal, but his pride won't let him admit he was played. And Aelina cares only that she's the part of a queen, while the Omegas freeze." Luna's jaw tightened. She turned her eyes to the city sprawled beneath the window, a sea of light indifferent to werewolf politics. "It's a tragedy, Silas, but it's the one David built for himself. I can't rescue a man who dug his own grave with both hands." "I didn't come to save David," Silas said sharply, and something in his tone made her turn back. He fixed her with a stare that had lost none of its edge. "I came to save your people. They're not my people anymore," she said, the words like ash. "The bond is gone. The mating bond is gone," he corrected, tapping his cane. "Pack law predates David's pride by centuries. He was so eager to seal his union with Aelina that he never filed the formal excommunication with the regional council. You're rogue by accident, Luna, not by law. You're still, legally, a citizen of Silver Crescent." She went still. Her mind moved instantly to what that meant. If she'd never been legally cast out, she wasn't an outsider meddling in pack affairs. She was still one of them. Silas drew a rolled, crumbling parchment from inside his coat and set it gently on the desk. The original charter of Silver Crescent, drafted in the 1700s. The Alpha holds sovereignty, yes, but only because the land is meant to sustain the pack. He leaned in, voice dropping. "If an Alpha fails at that, and a pack member holds the primary debt on the territory, that member can invoke the right of stewardship, a tribunal of assets." Luna's breath caught. It was a loophole, an enormous one, buried under centuries of dusty tradition. She wouldn't have to beat David in combat. This was a legal coup, clean and bloodless. "You want me to buy the debt from Marcus," she said, her mind already running the numbers. "I want you to take the territory," Silas said, leaning forward. "Marcus thinks he's playing checkers with a boy. Show him what chess looks like. Buy the debt, invoke the right, remove the king through the law, without a single drop of pack blood spilled." She stared at the ancient parchment, the fire that had carried her through 6 months of exile into something enormous. She looked up at him, her expression settling into cold resolve. "Tell the elders to hold on 1 more month," she said. Tell them help is coming. But Silas, when I return, I won't be coming back as an advisor." His grim smile deepened. "I wouldn't expect anything less, Alpha." The great hall of Silver Crescent sat frozen. Outside, a January wind tore through the pines, rattling the stained glass windows David had commissioned for his wedding barely 6 months before. Their once vibrant colors now looking almost cruel in the gray winter light. David sat at the long oak table, wrapped in wool, hunched over a stack of unpaid bills, his breath fogging in the air. To save what little firewood remained, only the nursery and the elders' quarters were heated. The cold had settled into his bones, a constant reminder of exactly how badly he'd failed. He rubbed at bloodshot eyes as the numbers blurred on the page. They owed Marcus $200,000 by week's end, a balloon payment on the loan that had funded the wedding and Eleanor's security upgrades. Footsteps rang against the stone. Eleanor swept in wrapped in a full-length white fur, arms crossed. "David, this is unbearable. There was ice on my wash basin this morning. My father's kennels are warmer than this house." He clenched his jaw, biting down on the urge to snap. "We're rationing resources, Eleanor. The pack comes first. I'm the Luna." She shot back, her expression twisting. "I shouldn't be freezing in my own home. Call my father. I'm sure he'd send a generator and some oil." "I won't beg your father for anything," David growled, standing so fast his chair scraped against stone. "We owe him more than enough already." She rolled her eyes, blind to the panic underneath his anger. "His family, David. It's not really a debt. It's just paperwork." He stared at his mate. In the beginning he'd been dazzled by her lineage, her looks, the promise of Northern Ridge soldiers guarding his walls. But 6 months in, the truth had become unbearable. Eleanor was ornamental. When trouble came, she called her father. When the books didn't balance, she suggested a party to boost morale. She had no grasp of the brutal machinery of running a territory. Luna used to reconcile the ledgers in an hour, while negotiating timber contracts on the side. Luna had been a partner. Eleanor was a burden. "Go, Eleanor. I have work to do," he said. Flat and cold, she scarfed and turned away. "Fine. I'll wait in the car with the heat running." As she left, the heavy hall doors opened again. Elias, David's beta, entered looking grim, a human in an immaculate suit beside him, briefcase in hand. The stranger looked entirely out of place among the rustic stone walls, and entirely unbothered by it. "Alpha," Elias said tightly. "This is Mr. Vance. He represents a financial firm in Oak Haven." David frowned, unease crawling up his spine. "I don't deal with human firms. You do now," the lawyer said smoothly, setting a thick envelope on the table without flinching at the growl building in David's chest. "My firm, Ethelgard Holdings, has purchased your entire territorial debt from Alpha Marcus." The blood drained from David's face. "Marcus sold it without a word to me." "Alpha Marcus is a pragmatist," the lawyer said with a hollow, courteous smile. "Ethelgard made him an offer he couldn't refuse. We're now your sole creditor, and per the terms of the loan you defaulted on 3 days ago. Foreclosure proceedings on the Silver Crescent borderlands begin immediately. You cannot foreclose on sovereign pact territory," David roared, slamming a fist onto the table hard enough to make the wood groan. "Under the human property law Alpha Marcus bound you to, when he had you sign," the lawyer said calmly. "We absolutely can, though the CEO of Ethelgard is willing to meet with you personally to discuss terms." David's thoughts spun. Marcus had used him, strung him along just long enough to sell his land to a company with no face at all. His ancestral hall suddenly felt like a coffin. "Where?" he choked out. "Oak Haven," the lawyer said, tapping the envelope. "The address is inside. Dress warm, Alpha. I hear it's cold out there." As the lawyer walked out, David sank back into his chair, his pride finally crumbling under the weight of what he'd done. He would have to walk into the human city and beg a stranger for his home. The drive to Oak Haven felt like crossing into another world. David's hands were white-knuckled on the wheel, his jaw locked. Beside him, Elias sat in silence as the pines gave way to strip malls, then highways, then the glass towers of the financial district. David hated the city, the smell of exhaust and stagnant water, the crush of too many heartbeats too close together, the way it scrambled his senses until he felt naked and cornered. He was an alpha. He belonged under open sky, feet on his own ground. Here, sealed inside the truck, he felt like he couldn't breathe. They parked in an underground garage beneath the Athelgard Tower. Waiting by the private elevators was the same sharp-suited lawyer, checking his watch with maddening calm. Punctual, he noted, gesturing them toward the open doors. The CEO's expecting you on 42. The ride-up was fast and silent, pressure building in David's ears. He caught his reflection in the brass panel. Exhausted, out of place beside the lawyer's crisp tailoring. A king arriving as a supplicant, at the mercy of a company he couldn't even picture. The doors opened onto a reception area flooded with natural light, polished slate floors, minimalist art, a wall of glass looking out over the entire city. It felt like a cathedral built for commerce, with none of the warmth of a home. Through there, gentlemen, the lawyer said. Stepping aside, David inhaled, squared his shoulders, and pushed his alpha presence outward, a subtle pressure meant to unsettle. Elias mirrored the stance behind him. They pushed through the frosted glass doors into a vast office. A long mahogany desk sat centered in the room, and near the window, back turned, a tall man reviewed something on a tablet. I am Alpha David of the Silver Crescent, he announced, voice booming with practiced authority. I'm here about the unlawful seizure of sovereign Packland. The man at the window, Julian Thorne, turned with a faint, polite smile. Alpha David, welcome. I'm Julian, the managing partner here, not the CEO. He gestured to the high-backed chair behind the desk, turned away from them, facing the skyline. Slowly, it rotated. David's breath stopped cold. His heart slammed against his ribs. Luna sat there, hands folded neatly before her, dressed in a flawless charcoal suit that squared her shoulders like armor. Her hair, once loose in the forest wind, was pulled back into a severe twist. She didn't look at him with warmth, or even with anger. She looked at him the way a predator studies something already caught. Hello, David, she said, voice smooth and utterly without feeling. David stared, his mind scrambling to reconcile the woman he'd exiled to a cottage with the force now sitting before him. The silence stretched thick enough to touch. Elias exhaled sharply and stepped back half a pace. You, David finally managed, his voice cracking. You're Ethelgard, CEO, primary shareholder. Luna unfolded her hands and pressed a button. A massive screen lit up behind her, a dense web of ledgers, deeds, and debt records, the Silver Crescent crest sitting square in the middle, drowning in red. This is a setup, David snarled, rage swallowing his shock whole. He leaned over the desk, using his size to loom over her. You engineered this. You used Marcus to humiliate me. She didn't flinch, didn't lean back. Her eyes were flat as polished stone. I didn't manipulate Marcus, she said, voice dangerously even. Marcus manipulated you. He saw an alpha hungry for a shiny new crown and sold you a gilded cage, 20% interest. I just waited until you were broke, and then I bought the cage. Sit down, David. We have business. He stayed standing, rigid with fury and shame. The desk between them a chasm he couldn't cross. He glanced at Elias for backup, but his beta was staring at the wall of debt, pale, silently calculating the scale of their ruin. I won't sit and I won't be talked down to, David growled, his voice dropping into the resonant frequency of a command. The tone bred into alphas, to force submission. Luna's expression didn't so much as flicker. That doesn't work on me anymore, David. You severed the bond yourself, remember, stood in the courtyard, and told me it was for the good of the pack. Your commands have no hold on me. And this isn't the forest. This is my territory now. The truth of it hit him like a blow. His alpha presence collapsed, dissolving into the sterile air. He sank into the chair across from her, all the fight draining out at once, replaced by a hollow, cold dread. What do you want? He asked, all thunder gone from his voice. Is this revenge? Do you want me to beg? Fine. I'll apologize for the ceremony. For Aelina, all of it. Just don't take the land. The elders have nowhere else to go. Something flickered across Luna's face, brief, almost imperceptible. The ghost of the woman who'd spent 3 years protecting the very people he'd nearly destroyed. This was never about my pride, David, she said, turning a silver pen over in her fingers. It's certainly not about Aelina. She's just a symptom of how badly you failed to lead. This is about survival. The stores are empty. The pups are cold. Silas came to me because you failed them. David's head snapped up. Silas came here. He brought me this. She reached into her drawer and drew out the crumbling parchment, spreading it carefully across the desk. The original Silver Crescent Charter. That belongs in the Pack archives, David said, panic warring with confusion. It belongs to the Pack, she corrected, and under its own laws, an Alpha keeps sovereignty only as long as he can sustain his territory. When he fails, and a Pack member holds the debt, that member can invoke the right of stewardship. You're not a member of this Pack, David argued, though the conviction had drained out of his voice. You never finished the excommunication filing. You were a bit preoccupied with wedding preparations, Julian said mildly from the window. Legally, Miss Vance remains a citizen of the Silver Crescent. The blood roared in David's ears. He remembered pushing the paperwork aside, calling it tedious, too eager for his new alliance with Marcus to bother. His own arrogance had opened the door to his own downfall. You're invoking the right, he whispered, as it all landed at once. She wasn't just seizing his land like some bank. She was using ancient Vorflaw fused with modern finance to legally strip him of his crown. Luna slid a thick stack of contracts across the desk until they stopped just short of his hands. Here are my terms, she said, every word carrying the weight of finality. You sign these. You step down as Alpha, voluntarily. Full stewardship of Silver Crescent transfers to Ethelgard Holdings. You announce your abdication to the elders by sundown tomorrow. And if I refuse, then I begin foreclosure under human law, she said without hesitation. The county sheriff arrives Friday to remove you and your bride from the Pack house. Every supply line into that territory freezes. No land, no resources, no Pack. The choice is yours, David. Submit and save your people, or cling to your pride and let them freeze. The silence that followed was crushing. David stared at the papers, the black ink spelling the end of his bloodline's rule. He'd traded a fiercely capable partner for the illusion of power, and lost his kingdom to her completely, in the end. Slowly, his fingers found the pen she offered. The pen felt impossibly heavy in his trembling hand, a small, elegant thing carrying the weight of an executioner's blade. He stared at the dotted line, the legal text blurring before his tired eyes. Nothing but the low hum of the building's power through the silence. No growls, no bared teeth, no blood on old ground, just a quiet bureaucratic ending. He looked up at her. There was no triumph in her face, no cruelty in her eyes, only the calm patience of someone who had already run every possible outcome. Her indifference cut deeper than any insult could have. If I sign this, he rasped, his voice stripped bare of authority, what happens to the Pack house? To the grounds our ancestors are buried under. The Pack house stays the cultural heart of Silver Crescent, she answered evenly. Ethelgard covers all structural upkeep and utility debts. The grounds go into a protected trust. No human development will ever touch them. Your people will be safe, David. They just won't be yours anymore. He closed his eyes. Her logic was airtight. She'd built a fortress from paper and capital, and was offering his people shelter inside it. He had no move left. With a long breath, he pressed the pen to paper and signed away his title, his sovereignty, his pride. In 3 strokes, Julian stepped forward, collecting the documents into a leather portfolio without a word. Supply trucks leave for the territory at dawn, Luna said, rising and smoothing her blazer. Food, heating oil, medical supplies. I'll come with the transition team Friday to speak with the elders. David rose slowly, his broad frame somehow smaller now, the wool coat hanging loose. Did you plan all of this from the moment you walked out? I plan to survive, she corrected softly, meeting his eyes with a flicker of old intensity. You built the gallows, David. I just bought the lumber. The ride home felt like a slow slide into nightmare. Elias drove in silence, the heater losing its fight against the cold. When they finally passed through the packhouse gates, the truth of it all landed on David completely. He'd left as a king begging for a loan and come home a private citizen, carrying an eviction notice. He called an emergency gathering in the hall. The elders huddled in blankets around a dead hearth. Silas stood at the back, leaning on his cane, face unreadable but sharp with focus. Elena swept down the staircase in her white fur, arms crossed. David, what is this? Why are the generators still off? Did you get the money or not? He looked at his mate. Whatever beauty he'd once seen in her had thinned into something hollow and vain. He turned instead to the elders, his voice raw and broken. I have failed you, he said. A collective gasp rippled through the freezing hall. The debt was too much. Alpha Marcus sold our notes to a private company to keep our land from human foreclosure. I've invoked the right of stewardship. Whispers broke out, panicked and confused. Stewardship. Elena cut in, stepping forward, face twisting. Who holds it? My father. No, David said, eyes locking on hers. Luna. The name landed like an earthquake. The murmurs stopped dead, replaced by shocked silence. That's impossible, Elena hissed, already pulling out her phone. She's rogue. A rogue can't hold Packland. She was never officially excommunicated. The paperwork was never filed, Silas said from the back, his grim smile returning. She's still a citizen, and now she's our steward. Elena paced furiously through a hushed call, then lowered the phone, pale and seething. My father says the Northern Ridge won't back a pack run by some corporation. He's pulling our guard. She looked at David, all warmth gone. I'm leaving. I married a ruling alpha, David, not a bankrupt tenant. I'll be packed within the hour. He didn't stop her. He watched her climb the stairs and understood, with total clarity, that the only person who'd ever truly fought for him was the one he'd sent out into the rain. 3 days later, the growl of diesel engines broke the frozen silence of Silver Crescent's morning. 6 massive climate-controlled trucks bearing Ethelgard's sleek emblem rolled slowly down the main road. The pack gathered at the courtyard's edge, breath fogging in the air, watching human contractors unload industrial heaters, pallets of grain, medical supplies, insulated blankets. For a people who'd been slowly starving for months, it looked almost like a hallucination. A black SUV pulled up near the stone steps. The door opened, and Luna stepped out into the biting air. No ceremonial silks this time, just tailored black slacks, a fitted cashmere sweater, and a long wool coat. She looked exactly like what she'd become, a formidable chief executive. The elders parted for her without being asked. No bowed necks. She wasn't their alpha, but as she passed, each one offered a deep, respectful nod, not the old deference to bloodline, but recognition of pure, undeniable competence. She had saved them. Silas came forward, cane tapping against the frozen stone, and bowed his head slightly. Welcome home, Miss Vance. Thank you, Silas. A real smile broke through her composure for a moment. Let's get the children into the East Wing. The crew's setting up heating there now. For the next 10 hours, she ran the relief effort like a field commander, setting up a temporary office in the very dining hall where David used to drown in unpaid bills, directing contractors, approving supply lists, reviewing damage reports on the crumbling roof near dusk. The hall's heavy doors creaked open. David stood there in a worn flannel shirt and work jeans, having spent the whole day hauling crates alongside the Omegas, refusing any special treatment. The exhaustion on his face ran deep, all trace of his old commanding arrogance gone. Luna glanced up from her tablet. She didn't ask him to leave, but she didn't invite him to sit, either. South quarters fully stocked, he reported, voice low. Elders are warm. The pups have eaten. I saw the logs. Thank you for the labor, she said. Professional, guarded. He took a careful step closer, stopping a respectful distance away. I owe you an apology, Luna, a real one. I let my ego blind me, and I nearly destroyed our people. I see it now. You were always the true strength holding this place together." She studied him, searching for the old manipulation, the command in his voice, the entitlement. She found none of it. Just a man, finally broken open and awake. "An apology doesn't fix the roof," she said quietly. "And it doesn't undo the fact that you traded my loyalty for a political fantasy. I accept it. Holding on to anger is a waste of my time. But nothing changes about who runs things now," he nodded, swallowing the truth of it. "I understand. I'll work the lumber yards, the borders, whatever the steward needs. The steward needs competent managers," she said, standing and crossing the room until only a few feet separated them. The scent of pine and hard work clung to him, and something old and unwanted ached in her chest. "Your strength and your knowledge of this land are still worth something, David. Ethelgard's expanding its timber operations north. We need a foreman who knows the forest." His eyes went wide. You want to hire me?" "I want to use a resource that's actually useful," she said, a faint challenge curling at her mouth. "This isn't charity, David. You'll answer to quotas, file your reports, take orders from my regional directors, but you'll be paid fairly, and you'll have a reason to get up in the morning." He stared at her, stunned by the sheer grace of it. She could have banished him, left him to rot in some cold cottage. Instead, she was handing him a chance to rebuild something, not as a king this time, but as a man. "I won't let you down," he said quietly. "Not again." "See that you don't," she said, holding his gaze a beat too long, the air between them thick with old wounds and something unexpectedly close to respect. She turned back to her desk. "Staging area 6A.M. We have an empire to run." Luna Vance never needed a crown handed to her by any alpha king, cast off and discarded for the illusion of old world power. She didn't fade into the background. She turned her mind, her patience, and her mastery of the modern world into a weapon, and used it to legally, methodically reclaim the very land that had thrown her out. She showed David, and every soul in the Silver Crescent, that real leadership isn't inherited through blood or forced by a roar. It's built, piece by piece, through grit, strategy, and refusing to ever doubt your own worth again.